So anyway, well, I'll wait for you to commence the conversation.
Well, we can just go ahead and start there. So, 1979, Phantasm. Uh, when did you first see it?
I guess I saw it a year or two after it came out. I think it was originally shot in 76 or 77, and then it was released in 79 because they apparently had some time that they had to spend looking for a distributor. I guess they eventually got Afghan Embassy to pick it up. And I suppose the reason why it was picked up was because of the great success of Halloween. I don't remember who the original distributor of Halloween was. It might have been Afghan Embassy. But anyway, they put it out in 79. And I seem to remember seeing this in the theaters when I was in my one and only year of college. So I would have had to have been 19, right? You can't get into college before
Right.
18 or 19. So I'm guessing it was, I was not interested in it because at that time in my life, I wasn't really particularly interested in horror movies. Right around that time, most of the horror movies were like slasher movies and things like that. And I always had, disinterest in that sort of stuff. But I had a friend in college who spent all of his time in his apartment sitting around smoking pot and blasting the Phantasm soundtrack, which he had on vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I guess, back then. Well, we had cassette tapes, but he had it up with the big record. And the score was done by um, Fred Myron.
It's a great score. It's a
It's
great
a great
score. I
score.
love it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is terrific and enormously important in the success of the movie, I think. Uh, and he apparently was influenced by Goblin and Mike Oldfield, the guy who did Tubular Bells,
Yeah.
the Exorcist. Uh, anyway, my friend said, "Oh, you got to come and see us playing at it was a theater in Times Square. Actually, it might have been the Afghan Embassy Theater. I think there used to be one in Times Square." So I sort of grudgingly went, and then I just thought it was terrific. I enjoyed it very much. And how about you? When did you first see it?
Probably it would have been VHS when it came out on VHS, whatever year that would have been. Probably early 80s.
Right.
It definitely wasn't 79 or 80, I wouldn't think. But yeah, thinking about it coming out in 79, but then filming it in 70, what do you say, seven? They were filming it in 76.
76, 77. They said it took a year to film.
Yeah,
They did.
because my big question is, did George Lucas steal the Jawas
No,
from
that's an
the?
interesting thing. I spent about a half hour this afternoon listing all the similarities to Star Wars that I saw in this
Yeah,
movie because I was sure it must be Don Coscarelli saw Star Wars and was trying to allow those influences into his
yeah.
film. And then I just quickly checked just to make sure I wasn't barking up the wrong tree. And it turns out the movie was 60% finished by the time they even heard of Star
Star
Wars.
Wars, yeah, that's a. I mean, like I said, it comes out in 79, but you think about, well, he wrote it probably before that, and
Well, it is an extraordinary thing because it's not just the Jawas. I mean,
yeah,
obviously, and apparently, while they were working on the film, somebody saw the trailer for Star Wars when the first trailer that was released. They saw the Jawas in the trailer, and everybody was in a panic, saying, "Oh my God, are we going to have to reshoot?" You know. But the interesting thing, and also another interesting aside, Don Coscarelli says that he was editing Phantasm in the same facility that Star Wars was being edited in. And sometimes he had to vacate the premises so that they could come in.
right,
I don't know how that could be, but anyway, there's a larger story there.
yeah,
But the similarities to Star Wars include the fellow that plays Jody, certainly looks like somebody that was cast because of his resemblance to Harrison Ford. Even the character that he's playing with his CUDA standing in for the Millennium Falcon,
right,
you
yeah,
know. And the fellow that plays Mike, he is very close in character and appearance to Mark Hamill. Same sort of young, innocent, naive kid, going through rites of passage, that sort of thing.
yeah.
Very similar to like Luke Skywalker. And their relationship is kind of similar as well. But then there's also, well, there's a cantina in this film,
Yeah,
Dune's Cantina, similar to Mos Eisley Cantina, um, and there's the silver ball, which is similar to, you can take your pick, either the interrogation droid that comes in to give a hypo to
right,
Princess
yeah,
Leia, or the training droid that Luke
Oh
Skywalker is
yeah, I
wearing,
forgot about that one. Yeah.
which is very similar. They probably their special effects were a little more advanced in Star Wars. I understand that the sphere in Phantasm was just stuck, or was actually thrown on a fish line. But I think that some of the shots it was stuck on a piece of glass in front of the camera.
Yeah,
But
that's how they done the ink pen floating in 2001.
right, yes,
Just
they
glued
use
it.
that.
Yeah,
They've
it's
used that trick a couple
double-sided
of times.
tape.
Right, right, yeah, and it's very effective, I thought. But
So,
anyway,
so is Reggie Bannister, is his character Obi-Wan or Chewbacca?
well, that's the trick. Yeah, we really can't figure out what he would be. He probably would have to be Obi-Wan, although he doesn't really fit the Obi-Wan um, character. You could say that the tall man is Darth Vader, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty. But actually, it turns out Coscarelli wasn't. Oh, I should also mention that just like with Luke, who suffers the loss of his parents, this guy is also he just lost his parents
Parents,
2 years ago. Yeah, so uh, that's the similarities apparently don't lead anywhere because he wasn't inspired by this. He says he was inspired by Salem's Lot to a certain extent, but he apparently got the original idea to do this because him and Reggie Bannister were talking about trying to get the rights to do an adaptation of Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes. I can see that, the
Right,
similarities, the sort of Halloweenish or autumnal quality that the film has is very much like what you would expect from a film adaptation of Something Wicked. He also says he was inspired to a certain extent by Invaders from Mars, which was a 1959 film that was done by William Cameron Menzies. And that's the one about the kid that sees the aliens crash land and he can't convince his family or the townspeople that the aliens are taking over. His father gets taken over. He goes out to see what it is, and he gets taken over by the aliens. And they all have a little mark on their neck. Anyway, similarities to Phantasm are pretty clear there as well. The kid trying to, grapple with adults that won't believe him when he sees something and they won't accept it. But this film, for me, and I think probably true for a lot of people, I'm the same age as the fellow that plays Michael. Michael Baldwin, I guess is his name.
Mm-hmm.
And so today is his birthday, by the way, as we shoot.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I was going to say.
Today is his birthday. And I had a sympathy with that character because when I first saw this, I was just a few years on from that time. And just like scenes in this film where he's sort of aimlessly wandering around the streets, that reminds me of myself at that age.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, when I had hair, it was actually a pretty similar style. I guess everybody in the 70s said if you had hair, it probably looked like that. So I had a certain connection to that character and the situation that he found himself in, sort of fearing and also anticipating all the things that would come with adulthood. Fearing adults. The tall man sort of represents adults, big, tall, towering figure, scowling all the time and growling. And he also represents death. I mean, he's a mortician. That's another thing that apparently Coscarelli was inspired by when he was thinking about what type of horror movie he wanted to make. Apparently the idea of doing something about morticians or the mortician business appealed to him because, it's kind of a spooky line of work, right? Everybody wears black and they get to monkey around with bodies behind the scenes. So it was actually a perfect idea for a horror movie. But beyond just sort of being in sympathy with the character, I also just got a kick out of it because it's such a crazy fucking movie.
Yeah.
I mean, what I like about the first film and what I sort of makes me less fond of the sequels is that the first film, you start with a real world environment. We understand that world. We can see ourselves in that world.
Yeah, relatable character. The characters were really relatable.
Right, yes. And as things go on, little mysterious things start to happen. And we don't need to know why they're happening. We don't need an explanation as we go along, because that's part of being following a mystery, right? You don't know why these things are happening. So we're willing to accept without explanation all the little strange, mysterious things, because we're assuming that at some point all of this is going to be explained. And it is kind of, it's not really a very logical explanation. But the problem with the sequels is they start with the inexplicable or bizarre or mysterious things. And they, like right from the second film, they're going through all these convolutions to try to explain why the girl that he has a psychic connection with is involved. All that sort of confusing stuff. And also Coscarelli's love for reversals, like having leading you to believe something is happening and then say, oh no, that didn't happen, that was just in their minds, or that was just a dream.
It was a dream.
I mean, he does it once in Phantasm at the end, where it was all a dream. No, it wasn't. Right. So, and that's fun because it sends the audience out with a little kicker at the end.
Yeah, plus he wasn't, I don't think he was planning on a sequel.
Right.
The first. So the first one was just an end. Just how we're going to.
Yeah, and it's similar to a lot of movies that were being made at the time that did a similar thing. The Fog has a similar end where you think it's over, and then Carey, of course, has the famous scene with the hand shooting up from the grave. So it's kind of fun because it doesn't really affect the story that you've enjoyed up to that point.
Yeah,
it's just a little way of the little way for the storyteller to say, we're not taking this that seriously.
Right, yeah. One last jump scare before you leave the theater.
Exactly. And that's pleasurable, and it helps you to appreciate the fact that the whole thing is meant to be fun. Whereas the second one, and I should say that the first film does grapple with some serious issues, right? I mean, it's about loss of your parents and feelings of the fear that kids might have that they're going to be abandoned.
Right. Yes, brother's getting older and going to move away and leave him there. Yeah.
So those are all things. And if you could very easily look at the first film as just sort of like a fantasy in the mind of this kid who's anxious about being abandoned, still mourning the loss of his parents, uncertain of where he fits in the world. So it has certain serious things underpinning it, but it's still just a wacky, fun movie. It's the sort of movie that a kid that age might make. It has that sort of anything can happen quality to it.
Right.
And when the first time I watched it, I was enjoying it up to the point where the finger turns into a bug, gets stuck in his hair. And then I said to myself, oh, I love this movie. Any movie that has a red-eyed bug flying around, that's when the whole thing just becomes delightful and really is endearing, I think, to the audience in a way that probably they could never have imagined it would be when they were doing it, right? They were just sort of throwing stuff up against the wall. Apparently, the movie was shot over the course of a year on weekends because you could get a free day if you rent the equipment on the weekend.
Yeah.
Which is a trick that my producer on Sleepless Nights used as well. We'd schedule shoots for a weekend so that we could get that the Sunday for free. So that's a technique, I guess, you use if you're trying to save money. He had a budget of like $300,000, so it was quite a bit more than what we had. But shooting on weekends over the course of a year means that they were able to keep coming up with different ideas and changing course and doing different things. And apparently they ended up with like a 3-hour rough cut. And a lot of that was edited down. It was, I edit more than an hour was taken out. And that's another thing I like about this movie, is that it's very clearly an edited film. It's not one of those films where they just sort of assembled the footage and put it out.
Right.
It's clear that they were thinking very carefully about how they could compress scenes and keep the pace up. And there's a lot of instances in the film where you see them using little editing tricks that I'm particularly attuned to right now because I'm re-editing my first film. And I can see all the things that I'm doing, they're doing there.
Yeah.
Like there's a couple of scenes where they're, like for instance, when they're standing by the casket, Reggie and Jody are standing by the casket looking at Tommy's body in the coffin.
Mm-hmm.
and you hear their conversation. And actually, the conversation starts over the earlier shot, which is of the mausoleum, or it's over the ceremony, I guess.
Yeah.
When they cut to them, they're not saying
They're not.
anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed there was a lot of scenes like that where it was
Right.
dialogue over top of them was B-roll,
Right.
B-roll footage. Yeah.
And it's a brilliant way to move things along
Yeah.
because you get the impression while you're watching it that you actually saw them saying those things, but you didn't.
Yeah.
Same thing like later when they're leaving the mausoleum. And there's a very brief shot of them, Reggie and Jody, walking across the lawn. And Jody starts to say something, and they immediately cut to a shot of the cooter driving away from the mausoleum.
Yeah.
And you hear the conversation over that shot, right? So you would get the impression that you saw a scene with Jody and Reggie talking, saying those things, but you didn't, right? And it's not even clear when you go back and you look at his lip movements when he starts to speak. It's not even clear what you're hearing is what he was saying in that scene.
Right. Yeah.
So, but when you look back on it, it looks kind of jumpy and choppy. But the first time I saw it, it just seemed to me that this was a particularly fast-moving movie. They weren't wasting time with unnecessary stuff. Apparently, they shot a lot of unnecessary stuff, but they were smart enough to go back and chop all of that
Take it
stuff
out.
out.
Yeah. Yeah. Back when we were talking about Plan 9 from Outer Space, I was talking about how the character dies next, and that next scene's their funeral. And I was like,
Right.
and it's like no time. They done the same thing in this movie, but it worked.
It
The
works
guy at
this
the
time,
beginning
yes.
gets killed by the girl. Next scene is them at the funeral, and I'm
Right.
like, but you don't pay attention to it. It just worked in this movie for some reason.
And just a little splash of dialogue that scene with Jody and Reggie standing in
Yep.
front of the mausoleum, that's enough just for them to say, they tell you why they're there.
Yep.
And
The guy
Reggie
died.
says
Yeah.
the guy died and he killed himself apparently, right? And that's it. And the economy of it, like for instance, they didn't really shoot, as far as I know, in a real mausoleum. They certainly
Right,
did.
yeah.
That mausoleum was a set, apparently was with contact paper on wood to simulate the marble. So they had that shot of the two of them standing in front of that mansion, and that mansion actually was used in A View to a Kill and in Burnt Offerings. So it's a frequently used mansion. They shot in California. I assume that's a California mansion. And even though the story was set in Oregon, they shot in California. So they just have that shot of the mansion and just a couple of scenes where people are actually standing in front of them. And they sprinkle that through the movie, and it gives you the impression that a lot of the movie actually takes place there.
Yeah, he even rides a bike up through
riding the bike,
yeah.
right? And I don't know if that cemetery where he was riding was actually near the mansion. That might be another location. But the fact that they were able to give you the impression of this much larger world, even though if you actually go scene by scene and look at the shots, it's very narrow, very narrowly focused, right?
Yeah.
There's so few characters in this when you stop and think about it, so few speaking parts. And yet you have the impression that there's a whole town there.
Yeah.
We were talking recently about that movie that was on Tubi TV. I forget the name of it now. The one with Tony Todd and Adrienne Barbeau.
Yeah.
And that had the opposite problem. I mean, we didn't trash that movie too much because it was a pretty solid job.
Right. Yeah.
But they were trying to create the impression of this town, and you actually it wasn't really very effective. You didn't really feel like you're in a town. In this case, you do feel like you're in a town, and you do feel like you're actually visiting a mausoleum. And so there's a sense of a larger world that the whole thing is taking place in. And that's, I think, largely attributable to the cleverness of the editing, knowing what to leave in, It also sort of reminds me of Jaws. Jaws was edited by Verna Fields. And remember in Jaws, there's that scene where Hooper's arriving and everybody's getting ready to go out to hunt the shark to win the prize. Somebody's giving away.
Yeah.
The mother of the boy that was killed is giving away, has a bounty on the shark. They shot a whole bunch of stuff of those different fishermen out in the water, tossing dynamite into the water and all sorts of stuff. And Verna Fields was smart enough to cut all that stuff out because she realized just by talking about it, it creates the impression in your mind. You sort of saw it all in your mind. But if you actually saw the footage, it's so small in scale that it's not, it doesn't look like anything. So sometimes it's best to just talk about it and don't show it. And that's what they were able to do here. They just give, with a little few lines of dialogue, they give us an idea of what we're supposed to believe is happening. And even they even have some scenes where the screen goes black and you just hear the dialogue over a black
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure when he goes into the bar the first time, I'm I'm remembering it was a full bar, but I don't think it was. I think he goes in, talks to the girl, and leaves.
Yeah, as
And
far
for
as I
some reason,
know,
I'm imagining like an entire,
that's it.
full bar, but it wasn't.
They shot it in such a way so that you're given the impression, probably based on your experience in watching similar movies. When you see a scene like that, you're probably going to see people in the background.
Yeah.
But in that case, I think he has one conversation with the bartender that lasts maybe 2 sentences, 3 sentences.
Right. Yeah.
And yet I had the impression after watching this movie the first time that was a whole scene.
Yeah.
It was just like a little snippet of a scene. You know, uh, there are some things that become truncated too much, and they sort of lose the meaning, the logic. Like for instance, after he goes to the fortune teller, he has that little session, which is very effective. That scene with the
Mhm.
fortune teller and him having that. Uh, I don't know what you would call it. It's not a faith test or a trust test of putting his
Right.
hand in a box.
I've seen that somewhere else too. That was in Dune.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, where he puts
Well,
his
maybe.
hand in the box to.
Well, if it's in the book, then that may be where he got the idea.
Yeah.
But the girl, the granddaughter, I assume it's her that we see from behind going
Going
towards.
back to the yeah.
And there's a shot of her in the mausoleum set, approaching the door where the right room is. She opens the door, and they cut away, and you hear a scream.
Scream. Yeah.
So anytime you see a scene cut that way, that means that wasn't the way it was shot.
Right.
There was some big thing that was cut out, and they solved the problem of what happened to her just by having her scream. So the audience assumes. You put
She's
that over
dead,
the side, she's out of the picture. But I don't really understand, because I don't know what they cut out. I don't really understand why she's there in the first place.
Yeah, I don't know.
She's carrying flowers. In the shot where she's approaching the mausoleum, we only see her from behind, so there's a possibility it wasn't even the same actress.
It could have been somebody different altogether. Yeah.
So, but and then there's other little things, like there's a moment when he's riding his motorbike, dirt bike around the cemetery, where there's a sudden sound. It almost sounds like an explosion, and he's thrown off the bike.
Right.
And they have a quick cut of Angus Scrimm looking over, like he was responsible for that. I assume that's something that was put together in the
Put
editing.
together. Yeah.
He fell off his bike in some scene, and I guess they thought, well, we don't want to cut that out because that's like production value. That's a stunt. So let's try to tie it in with the story that we're telling by having Angus Scrimm, a close-up of him, so it looks like he's present and witnessing this, and that maybe he had some sort of effect, used this telepathic power,
Yeah.
which doesn't appear anywhere else in the movie. But that's the downside of cobbling things together in that fashion. I suppose I'd have to say that I'm not really that impressed by the climactic scene when they dispatch the tall man, because the idea late in the movie of suddenly deciding that there's a mine shaft somewhere, and coming up with the idea that you could somehow lure him out there and get him to fall down a hole, that's kind of a stretch.
Yeah.
First of all, there's no reason, if he's a supernatural being, or a science fictional being, an alien of some kind, there's no reason to believe that that would be effective, right? Killing him by just throwing him down a hole might not work. And of course, as we learned in the sequels, it didn't work.
Yeah.
So, but
and they never mentioned the mine before that, so
right, it's just
kind of like
just they didn't have an ending in mind apparently when they were working on the film, and I guess they just sort of pulled that out of the air.
Right.
I honestly can't think of a better ending, but yeah, I mean, the ending is satisfactory in the sense that the movie has to end at some point, and that's as good an ending as anything else.
Yeah.
It's enjoyable enough up to that point, so that it's not really a problem. And of course, if we see the whole thing as just a sort of fantasy in the mind of a boy, then, what difference does it make if it's logical?
Yeah.
So, but it's a movie that I think probably for me and for a lot of other people, it's we have much greater affection for it than it probably really merits.
Yeah.
I think Don Coscarelli is a smart guy, and I think he's a talented filmmaker, and he's done some great movies. Uh, but it's not a perfect film by any means. It's just something about it. There's a time and a place and a feeling that it evokes, and people my age, at least, are sort of captured by it.
Yeah, I've always liked. I mean, it's always been one of my favorites. I've always liked it. The idea of like the way they're doing the. I guess it's a parallel universe. I know they go into it in the later movies, which I don't really care for. I like the ambiguity of like what is going on here, because they actually show where where that portal goes to, and I like the idea of that portal just being the two poles.
Mm-hmm.
They tied in with the tuning forks, early on. I was like, oh, that's like a cool idea that you don't see anybody else do, and I thought that was good.
Yeah, it's another thing that sort of works on a dream level.
Yeah,
It's a dream logic. I don't know why a tuning fork would be particularly useful in a situation like that, but visually it certainly works, and the fact that the guy is a musician, he happens to have a tuning fork, so it sort of ties all of that stuff.
And he has the right note.
And he has
the
just the
tuning
right
forks
note.
come in the different, yeah.
But a lot of those things, like the Silver Spheres, I was surprised in watching it this time. I watched it like a day or two ago, how abrupt their appearance is.
Yeah.
And there's no explanation, and everybody, as with every other phenomenon in the movie, they almost immediately accept whatever is going on.
Yeah.
I was concerned watching the movie this time that there would be scenes of dialogue where they were explaining stuff to each other, and I'm glad there isn't.
Yeah, no.
Like the scene when Reggie comes upon them when they're struggling with the bug, trying to force it down the drain, the garbage disposal. I was afraid that there would be a long scene there where they would explain all the stuff that had happened, but no.
Yeah.
Reggie's,
No.
you want to go and kill the guy, the mortician at the mausoleum? Sure, I'm down.
Yeah, there was a scene whenever Michael's watching his brother and the girl in the cemetery, and then later on when he's telling him what he saw, they show the exact. And I'm like, well, why did they show it again? Yeah, it's like you didn't need to really show that again, but
yeah, that struck me as well. I guess they felt that there was no way to lead into the additional stuff that they showed in that flashback without starting from that point. But flashbacks create the impression at times in the story that there are continuity lapses, and there are continuity lapses. But for instance, one of the people on the IMDb mentioned that it might look like a mistake that the fellow that Jody is speaking to when Mike is under the car, that he's talking to Jody as if he's just meeting him, even though we've seen him at the funeral as one of the pallbearers in the earlier scene. But actually, that was a flashback when Mike is remembering that conversation, overhearing that conversation. That's a flashback that would have taken place before the funeral.
Yeah.
So that really isn't a continuity mistake. But the thing of it is that there's so much playing with time, moving through different time frames, that it's easy to get sort of confused. And that might be one of the reasons why the sequels, which go even further in that direction, weren't really very successful at the box office for the few that were released to theaters. I guess it was really just 2 that was released to theaters, right?
Yeah.
3 on was mostly direct-to-video.
Direct-to-video, yeah.
So as much as the one really admirable quality about sequels is that even though they don't work that well, they didn't give up that sort of crazy approach to things. They're completely unpredictable, and the plots are inexplicable. Right? There's no way to even describe the plots of any of the sequels. When you get to Ravage, which is the last one they made, I guess in 2016 or so.
Yeah.
That one apparently was cobbled together from stuff that was shot for a web series that they were planning to do. And I defy anybody to explain the plot.
Yeah.
Also, they shifted in the sequels from a focus on Mike, and I always think that the vulnerable character, the innocent character, is the best person to stick with, because everything looks challenging and menacing to that person. Yeah. That's perfect for a horror movie. Instead, they decide, possibly because well, in the case of Universal, they didn't want to use the original actor,
Yeah, they
so
brought it. Yeah,
brought another guy in. So right away we have a continuity lapse between the first movie and the second movie
yeah.
because
I mean, I like the second movie, but that replacing that actor just it's too jarring. You're just
yeah,
because it's almost like you're watching it and you're not watching the same movie. You know
that's
what I'm
it.
saying? You're
Yeah,
not watching the same story.
yeah.
You can't relate. Even when that girl's looking at her drawings that she's doing and her memories, they use footage from their first movie, and it's too jarring to see
Uh,
the original actor and now the new actor. And
and also, he's a completely different type of person. I mean,
yeah,
the first guy at that age, he was a sort of perfect representation of an adolescent, a young boy,
yeah,
and he seemed completely vulnerable to the problems of the world, right? Skinny little kid. Then when they do the second one, they have this sort of, I guess Universal was the one that insisted on using him. Now, he might be a talented actor. I haven't seen him in anything else. I understand he went on and did some other films, but he's more like the sort of hunky guy that you might
yeah,
see on a WB show, or uh, uh, just a completely different type of person, and also not convincing as a sort of vulnerable
yeah.
person that's sort of grappling with the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, in part two, they start. That's when it turns into an action film.
Yes, yeah,
They go into the hardware store, commando style, and put together all the weapons and the
right,
4-barrel shotgun and the
right.
flamethrowers and stuff. So it kind of
So
takes
that
away from the
right.
charm of the original one.
I would say so. I mean, I know a lot of people. There are some people that actually prefer the second one. I was speaking to a friend the other night, and he says he enjoyed the second one. I guess because it came along at a time in his life when somehow he could relate to what they were doing in that
Yeah.
film. But to me, it looks like, I don't know if Aliens had been out by that point, but it almost looks like they're taking an Aliens approach.
Like I
Uh,
said, that scene reminded me of the scene from Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he
yeah,
breaks into a army surplus store and is getting like all the weapons.
right. In Commando, they do it in Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead.
That yeah,
There's a bunch of movies where that scene of them, everybody's suiting up.
yeah,
But also, it would seem that they're thinking of trying to reposition Reggie's character as a sort of Bruce Campbell character.
yeah,
With the shotgun and all that sort of stuff. And that's cool. Yeah, I can understand. He's an entertaining screen presence. It's fun to watch
hmm
him in the sequels, and with some of the sequels, he's about the only thing that's really
yeah. I
fun.
like 1 and 3. I guess are my favorites. 3 was just I know it was they still had a lot of the action stuff, but it seemed more fun than what part 2 did.
Yeah, part two might be an instance where they actually had too much money.
Yeah,
Yeah, the first film had a certain amount of special effects work, but it was very rudimentary stuff, and it's more fun because it's so simple. And then the second one is like a lot of prosthetic makeup effects and things like that, and it just becomes a special effects festival,
yeah,
rubbery special effects wherever you look. And also, the first film had relatively modest amount of violence. I mean, it's surprising to learn that they almost got an X rating for the brain drilling
yeah,
scene. But other than that, there's really not a tremendous amount of violence in the movie. And other than a brief glimpse of the body double's breasts,
yeah.
uh, for the lady in lavender, as she came to be known. There isn't any great deal of sex. There's not a great deal of explicit violence. But in the second one, I don't remember it well enough to remember if there's any nudity. Is there any? Do you recall?
I'm not for sure.
But there's certainly a tremendous amount of violence,
Yeah,
pretty gory violence as
yeah, because I
well.
haven't seen that one in a while. Because here, this was the weird thing. Universal, I guess, is the ones that put out part 2,
Yeah.
right? So you go to Peacock, which is the NBC Universal streaming service. They have all the movies except for part 2.
That's
And I
weird.
was like, why wouldn't they have part 2, the one that they paid for?
Yeah, that's the ways of streaming platforms is
Yeah,
very strange and weird. Who knows what the rights problems might be with something
right.
like that. But as far as I know, it's pretty widely available elsewhere, right? I mean, where did you end up watching it?
I did. Well, I didn't watch it this
Oh, you didn't
time.
watch it
I
this time.
I just seen it not too long ago. Like I've seen enough to remember, but I just kind of refreshed on everything else that they had available.
Yeah. Well, my friend was particularly impressed with the idea of these towns being decimated as the tall man goes from place to
Yeah,
place. And I suppose that's an interesting idea. I think the problem for me is that uh, the more you try to make these sort of dream-like things in the first film seem convincing by coming up with explanations, the more that weighs the whole thing down, it becomes kind of
yeah.
like a chore to watch, you know. And
There's too much. Yeah, because once they got into the, I guess it was Oblivion, where they try to do a backstory of the tall man, I'm just
right,
like, oh, come on,
right.
I don't care.
Yeah, it takes away some of the mystery of that character, you
Yeah,
know.
the
I
mystique and the, it's just I just want to know that he's from some red planet, and I don't. Yeah, that's all I need to know. And
right.
he
You
turns
don't
humans into little Jawas.
you right. Puts them into oil drums. You don't want to have characters like that expanded on too much because it sort of takes away the menace. And I have to say, the one great asset that this series had, all the movies, Angus Scrimm is terrific.
Yeah,
All right, he is a delight to watch. There's so many instances in horror movies, particularly with the franchises that have been coming out since Phantasm was first done. There's so many franchises where people become stars by playing sort of masked characters that never have to do anything
yeah,
except stab people or, and this is an instance where the guy is a really good actor for at least for the role he's playing.
oh yeah,
He has it down, and his voice and his delivery is so perfect. It's the notes just perfectly like playing a piece of music. He is possibly the only real reason to watch Ravager, the last one.
yeah.
You know, and apparently he was ill at the
Yeah, but I
time.
don't. I'm trying to remember if he even got to finish it before he died.
Well, I think they shot most of the stuff like this, and then they just
Hmm.
sort of stuck his head on
Oh, okay.
bodies at different moments in the film. Uh, it's the interesting thing as they went along, they gave him more and more dialogue, which
Yeah,
is understandable because he really handled the dialogue well. By the last one, you got to say, gee, what a trooper, even at 89, still willing, even though I guess he couldn't travel, still willing to, allow them to make him up and do the scenes, do the dialogue. So it's worth seeing for that reason. And it is kind of inventive in a way. Apparently, it was all sort of cobbled together, like I say, from a web series, and there's a lot of CGI. And a lot of people were very down on it.
right.
But there's a certain amount of inventiveness and cleverness in it. It's just that it doesn't have a coherent story, and that's frustrating, I think, for the audience. We would like to see a story where the bad guy gets what's coming to them, and the good guys prevail, and there's some sort of satisfying resolution, particularly with characters like these characters that, for whatever reason, became, the audience really developed an affection for them. Uh, I guess you could have said that maybe what they should have done from the second film on was get rid of all the characters except for the tall man and just focus on other sets of characters dealing with a similar thing.
Yeah,
And
different towns.
right, in different towns. And maybe at some point you could have Mike or Jody, or well, Jody is dead, I guess, according to the first
Yeah.
one. Mike come along and say, this happened to me, this was my experience, and help them through it. Rather than starting with him, he's coming out of a mental institution in the second film. It's just it. I understand that you're in a spot if you've directed something that turns out to be a success, and people are saying we want to see more.
Right.
So what do you do? I did everything I wanted to do. I did in the first film, so you have to start doing like variations or repetitions of the same stuff. By the last film, and maybe this even started earlier in the sequels, it seems like there's this constant thing of people who are supposedly dead reappearing.
Yeah, the Jody character keeps coming back.
Right? And you have to wonder whether that character is such a strong character that we really need to see him again. He
Yeah.
really only serves a function in the first film when the Mike character is that age. By the time he gets older, you would think that his older brother, dead or alive, wouldn't be factoring so much in his life, especially
Yeah.
if he has all this stuff to deal with. The other problem with the sequels is they and this is also something, this is similar to the Jaws syndrome. Right? You start with a film where everything happens randomly. The people who are affected just happen to be there when the shark attacks, right? And then as the movies go on, we're supposed to believe that shark is carrying a grudge.
Yeah.
Seeking out Chief Brody's wife and children.
Follow him to the Bahamas.
Which is preposterous, right? And the same thing happens in this film. It's less preposterous because the whole thing is kind of preposterous. So, but the idea that the tall man begins to develop a special interest in Mike and Jody and Reggie, like those become his great nemesis in the world, or his nemesis, if there is such a word. That sort of strains credibility, you know.
Yeah.
And they also bring in, I forget which movie, they bring in all these sort of aliens type characters, you know, Carey. Everybody has a specialty. You know,
Yeah.
One's a martial arts expert and so forth. And the problem is, first of all, they usually get actors that aren't particularly convincing as tough guys or tough girls. You know, one thing you can say about Aliens is that James Cameron found actors that could convincingly play Marines.
Yeah.
When they did that tough guy talk, it might have sounded a little corny, but it was convincing enough so that you bought them as Marines. In the sequels to Phantasm, it's very hard to believe that any of those people are experts in martial arts or any kind of, you know, armed warfare. You know, they just don't see it. The stuff just doesn't come out of their mouths the right way. You know, the little quips, you know, and the tough guy lingo just doesn't seem very convincing. But I guess you can't ask too much for movies that were made for a few $100,000.
Right. See, I guess they kind of done that with 3. Was the Reggie character just moves on. Now it's just him going to the next town. Now he teams up with new people.
Right.
So that's, you know, they kind of done that. You know, tall man's already moved to that town and pretty much destroyed it, and he shows up. And it's him and a new kid. Now they're fighting. Yeah.
The new kid, sort of like a Home Alone.
Home Alone, yeah. Sets traps in the house, yeah.
But I guess also similar to Newt in Aliens, right?
Right, yeah.
Although she isn't quite as active in the battle, but also the tendency to go for the idea that Reggie is some sort of perpetual lech.
Yeah.
You know, that he's hitting on every girl that he meets all through the sequels, you know, and never achieving success, right? He doesn't get laid at once, I don't think.
They're right.
Maybe he gets laid once when he goes to bed with the girl and she turns out to have orbs for breasts, which must have been a rude awakening.
Yeah. I think I was in Oblivion.
That's in Oblivion. But the role of women in the sequels is less excusable because they've moved away from the idea in the first film that this is just a fantasy in a small boy's mind.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at the women in the first film, they don't really register very much, right? And you have the lady in lavender, who is, I guess, just the tall man in disguise. And you have the granddaughter of the fortune teller, and the fortune teller, 2 other women, and they don't really amount to much in the story. And you have the 2 girls that show up who are supposedly running the antique shop, and they're friends of Jody, supposedly.
Right.
And that's another instance where editing probably sort of truncates things in a sort of uncomfortable way or sloppy way, that you just suddenly sending Mike off to stay with these 2 people that we haven't been introduced to, and we just get a couple of lines of dialogue to establish that they're running an antique shop, and 5-6 minutes later they're gone from the movie.
Yeah.
But probably the most awkward thing is when Reggie has to explain how he found them and freed them from the mausoleum. We don't see any of that. That's all been cut out if it was ever shot. And he makes the very unfortunate remark of saying they took off into the woods like scared rabbits, which seems like a strange thing to say, right? I mean, why would you be surprised that 2 women that have gone through this sort of extraordinary ordeal would be scared?
Yeah.
But there's a couple of lines in the film that sort of sound clunky, and it makes me wonder if maybe the actors got the lines wrong and they just figured, well, it doesn't matter, it's not important dialogue anyway, so we'll leave it in. Like there's a scene where the lady in lavender is leading Jody away from the bar. And when they get to the cemetery, she says, what's the one thing you do in this town? And that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see somebody, him or her, saying, what do you do for fun in this town? But what's the one thing you do in this town? That doesn't really make sense, right? And he starts to say something, and she cuts him off by kissing him. But it doesn't sound like what he was starting to say would have been an appropriate response to what she said. So I think she must have flubbed that line, and they just figured it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's a couple of instances in the film like that. There's some of that dialogue where the scenes have been really compressed, also seem kind of strange. Like when when they're walking away from the ceremony, and he says something to the effect of, I don't like funerals, or funerals are not my scene, or let's get out of here. Anyway, it's also, it's like first he says, Jody says something, and then Reggie says goodbye to Tommy, and then Jody says, let's get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Those three lines don't really sound like they were going together. But that, again, doesn't really matter, because none of that dialogue is really important anyway. It's just to sort of move things along. It sort of creates, it results in a sort of dreamlike impression that is exactly what, works in this. I noticed again, funeral scene, people in the group holding umbrellas,
Yeah.
even though it didn't appear to be raining. That's something we see in a lot of movies when they do funeral scenes. God bless Dan Curtis, when he did a funeral scene, I guess it was in House of Dark Shadows, and he called in the local fire department, and they just rained down water on a torrent of water on the people. They looked like they were drowning in the water. That's the way to do a funeral scene. But anyway, so where were we? We were talking about what? We were talking about the sequels, but maybe we should.
Well, I wanted to touch on one thing too. I noticed in the first one, they have this, reflective sphere flying around. I didn't see the camera or a crew member, not one time. In the later films, they kind of slacked off on that, and I started noticing stage lights and
oh, really? Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, and so I was just like, I don't know how they done it in the first one. I don't know how they done it without getting are they hiding the camera behind something? Are they, you know what I'm saying? Are they filming, is the camera behind a wall somewhere? I don't know how they're keeping the camera out of that. Because I know they didn't go back in and digitally remove it.
Oh, no. It might have been like a sheet of glass that was on a matte box in front of the lens with a small ball, half of a small ball attached to the glass. And that might have, I suppose you could light it, figure out a way to light it so that you wouldn't get any sort of reflections from anything, because it was close enough to the camera, so you would just see black, basically.
Right.
Black of the inside of the matte box, and the camera probably wouldn't be recognizable in the reflection.
I know that, or maybe filming with filming with another mirror, like having a mirror set up and you're filming, the camera's filming the mirror, and if you angle it right, it won't show up or something. I don't know.
It's possible. Well, it can be done. I mean, even if it's just a question of putting some black drapes or something in front of the camera, and you couldn't do that for the lights, but I guess if you position the lights properly, they would just look like little pinpoint reflections in the sphere. So, but there's always a way to do that stuff. It's just that when it was first done, it was kind of a startling effect, because we hadn't really seen anything like that. I can't remember anything else like that, other than the things we talked about in Star Wars, which were pretty obviously matted into the shot. But there was a scene in Star Wars where Luke is riding his land speeder, and they just put a mirror in front of the wheels so that it was reflecting the desert.
Yeah.
And that struck me as being kind of remarkable, as an example of a practical effect, not an optical effect.
Yeah.
And it's kind of surprising, because when you first see it, you say, gee, how do they do that? It looks so convincing. So using mirrors and things like that could very well be a way of achieving effects like this. Mirrors go way back to the sound era, right?
Yeah.
So and most of the effects are pretty fun, even if they're not completely convincing. it's not the greatest bug in the world. In a way, maybe it being kind of a crappy looking bug makes it that much more enjoyable. It looks like something you might have bought in a toy store.
Yeah, remind me of something you'd see in a William Castle movie.
Or in a William Castle movie,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, William Castle shopped for all his props in a toy store. And the finger in the box, of course. I saw somebody on the IMDb saying that they saw the stick that was attached to the finger to make it move.
To make it move.
It's pretty obviously not a real finger.
Yeah.
But all of these things don't really, from my perspective, they don't damage the movie at all.
Yeah, it doesn't take anything away from it.
Right. I mean, a boy that age, probably his only experience with dismembered body parts would be with toys that he bought, Halloween things and stuff like that. So that's probably what he would think a dismembered finger would look like. It just adds to the fun. I've always been of the feeling that when you're doing gore effects or stuff like that, achieving complete realism isn't necessarily the right thing to do for some movies.
Right.
If your movie is supposed to be entertaining and not disturbing, then going with really convincing and really accurate gore effects can sort of be, off-putting. At least that's my feeling. I might be alone in that.
I think the yellow, I guess, blood
right.
look way more disgusting than real
that's
blood.
True. Yeah, that's true.
Thick and pasty looking, look like baby food.
Right. Yes, and it probably was.
Yeah.
But you're right. It adds to the fantasy element because you get somebody who's bleeding this sort of yellow slime, and it takes away the unpleasantness of the gore if it had just been blood, But they certainly made up for the lost time in the sequels because there's plenty of blood splashed around, and probably to diminishing effect, I would say. But it's a fun movie. I've always had affection for it, and I think that as we said, the music is a big factor in making it work. There's a lot of people I know who didn't care for the movie, but they love the music.
Oh yeah, it's a great. Like I said, it's a great soundtrack, great score.
Yes, and Coscarelli apparently also cited Dario Argento's Suspiria as a source of inspiration. You could sort of see that as well, not just because of the music, which has a similar quality to it, the goblin music, but also the sort of inexplicable, dreamlike quality of the story. When nothing really is explained satisfactorily, and surprisingly, it doesn't really damage the movie. It would actually be a lesser movie if it was thoroughly or properly explained. So it shares that sort of dreamlike feeling and effect with Argento's films. I think what happened with Argento, and probably what happened with the sequels to Phantasm, is that there are a lot of things that fans might be willing to forgive in the first film, as far as lapses of logic in the plot or weak effects and things like that. But when the film becomes an enormous success and they start doing sequels, then everybody's standards start to go up.
Yeah.
And just like with Dario Argento doing his Dracula thing, and people look at it and say, "What the fuck is that?" All the little things that people might have found very charming in his earlier films and did find charming and entertaining, suddenly now that there's such high expectations, he's considered a master of horror films, and he's doing like Dracula turning into a praying mantis and things like that. And that stuff just doesn't fly anymore. Those sort of weird things that you might come up with and try are going to end up disappointing the fans because they have invested so much of themselves in their fandom of this franchise that they want the thing to be, really tight and smart and effective.
Yeah, a lot of bad CGI in that movie too.
And his Dracula.
The Dracula, yeah. It just, I mean, when you think of his movies, you think of practical effects, and then he tries to do this, and it's just horrible.
Yeah, and I mean that's such a common refrain, right? With people complaining about how old school filmmakers start to use CGI, and it's just not the same. I mean,
I mean,
Um,
it's probably cheaper, and you probably can't. There's probably not a lot of people doing practical effects anymore, so it's probably
um,
harder to find it.
I think that's the problem, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I still remember in his. Have you ever seen the Stendhal syndrome?
No, I don't think I've seen that one.
There's some
Oh,
scene.
is that the one about the monkey?
No, no, it's one
Uh,
where the I guess it's a real condition where you want to look at a painting and it makes you do crazy stuff or something. I don't know.
uh,
But anyways, there are scenes in it where like somebody gets shot through the jaw,
mm,
and they show the bullet going through the breaking up the teeth and all that. And you just know that they had to build this gigantic mouth to
right,
film. It's just amazing stuff.
right,
Whenever somebody takes a pill, the camera follows the pill down the throat and into the stomach. It's like that they built that. You know what I'm saying?
right.
You can't. So that's just crazy. But then to go from that to a 3D praying mantis, it's
Yeah, well,
not the
and
same.
also we know that the people that did those effects, whether it's prosthetic effects or whatever, those people had a personal artistry and genius.
Yeah,
You can sort of see their imprint on it, right? You can recognize, like Rick Baker, I can recognize his work.
yeah,
When he does creatures, you could sort of say, oh, that's a Rick Baker creature because there's something about the way he does them. With CGI, and I'm not knocking CGI artists because that's great skill and requires a lot of effort. But uh, there are a lot more people that can do that because he's just using software that's
yeah,
widely available. So once you master the software, a lot of this stuff should be fairly easy to do. It might be time consuming because you have to do rendering and all that sort of stuff. But it's not quite the same work as like with miniatures. Uh, there's a documentary that's being put out on YouTube, multiple parts interviews with all the people that used to do uh, uh, miniature effects
hmm
for movies in the 70s and 80s. I think it's called Sense of Scale or Sense of Size. It's on YouTube. You can search for it. But you listen to these people talk about all the effort they put into building these tiny little miniatures, elaborate things for movies like Blade Runner. You really have to be impressed with their artistry and
Oh yeah,
craftsmanship. Whereas nowadays, probably even a mediocre CGI artist can whip up a whole cityscape, and without breaking a sweat, right?
that
Uh,
at this point you can just buy one
right, right.
pre-made.
It's
You
reached
don't have
that
to.
point.
Yeah,
So that if there's a reason why we admire those old school effects, it's because they really took effort and thought and time, and it was the work of a small group, sometimes just one artist, as opposed to a whole squad of people sitting behind computers somewhere. And also, CGI has its limitations as well. You can sort of
right. Yeah.
recognize,
It's
so
just like with the in this one or I'll say the first three sequels, the first two sequels, the fact that they're using the real sphere and filming it and not getting camera in it and crew members in it,
uh,
and then you get to the last one and it's all CGI and it's just
yes, that
it
doesn't have the
doesn't
same
look as
power.
good and it's not as impressive because it's you know
Well, I felt sorry for the fellow that directed it. I think the last one. I think he was also the CGI artist on it.
hmm
And I know that a lot of, how the critics and the fans online, everybody's an expert.
yeah, yeah,
Everybody knows the mark of quality when it comes to CGI. To my eyes, it didn't look terrible. It's just that it looked like CGI.
yeah,
You know, it wasn't embarrassing. It was, there are a lot of other movies where that would have been considered perfectly acceptable. But in this instance, you have the earlier film to compare it to, and that's the problem, right? Uh, the orb or the sphere is not that impressive an idea. It's how they did it in the first movie that
yeah.
makes it impressive. That's why it's exciting, because it looks like it's actually there flying across the set. And I guess it was to a certain extent, right? They were actually swinging a ball on a fish line, at least in
Yeah.
some of the shots.
Or
So,
filming in the reverse shots whenever it's flying into somebody's head.
right.
They got to pull it off of them and then film it back. Roll the film backwards
Yeah.
but it's still. I mean, you can tell whenever they do reverse filming, but it's something about it.
Yeah, it's more impressive because something was actually done on the set.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, that's another problem with the sequels is that they make the mistake of thinking that just because people liked the sphere hitting the head in the first film, we want to see that over and over and
Over
over
and over
again.
again. Yeah.
And there's really only so much mileage you can get out of something like that. You know? But anyway, I admire the effort. I know that the sequels were beyond the Universal one. The sequels were not big budget affairs. So I always have respect and admiration for folks that are doing movies on modest budgets and creating some pretty entertaining stuff. Some memorable moments from some of the sequels. So uh, my congratulations to them. I think now that Angus Scrimm has passed away, hopefully they won't try to do
Try to
any
make
more.
make another one. Yeah.
And I suppose you could reboot the whole thing, which I guess would be the only way to do it. But maybe they should just leave it
Let it
be.
go. Yeah.
In watching I guess it's the remastered version. I guess J.J. Abrams was responsible for getting the film remastered. Uh, he apparently was a fan of the movie. He actually named one of the characters in one of the Star Wars movies after
Yeah.
Phantasm.
Captain Phasma.
Right. So he was responsible for getting like a 4K restoration done.
Yeah, I was gonna say when I watched the first one, rewatched it today. It had the Bad Robot logo at the beginning. I was like, oh, that's weird. So I guess he basically owns it now, or maybe since they've done the restoration on it, maybe they were, but yeah, maybe his company done the restoration. So
he has some connection to it now. Yeah. Where did you see it?
on the Peacock network,
Peacock.
Peacock streaming app.
Well, the version I have, I don't know exactly if this is the latest version. I don't know if it's the 4K one, but it looks terrific. It's high definition, presentation, and looks terrific to me. Certainly looks much better than the versions that we saw over the years from VHS and even some of the DVDs. It's a well shot movie for a low budget movie.
Oh yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, but his budget was probably in the same range as Halloween. Halloween, I think, cost $200,000 or $300,000, and so did Phantasm.
Yeah, I was wondering if he had because a lot of the stunts seemed like that the actors were just doing their own stunts.
Yeah,
when he breaks the bike, I was like, that's the character. I'm not for sure. Whenever he breaks out of the room with the shotgun shell and the hammer.
Yes.
I'm like, did he really do that, or is that, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I just wondered. Didn't seem like there was a lot of OSHA people in the set.
Yeah. Well, Reggie, apparently the actor, did some of his stunts. I guess he sort of prides himself on doing some of the stunts. He mentioned in an interview I read with him that he feels that helps the storytelling if the audience can actually see the actor's face in the stunt rather than having to hide the actor's face and it's a stunt man. But it's also true that on a production like this they were flying by the seat of their pants.
Yeah.
Apparently they didn't even realize that there was danger in using blanks. They didn't realize that you could. I mean, there's been a couple of people that have been seriously injured, and there was an actor, John Eric Huxham, a TV actor who was playing around, put a gun to his head, and blew bone fragments into his brain because he didn't realize that plume of that flame that comes out of the barrel of the gun is that's a lot of force there.
Yeah.
And, so you can't put a gun, even if it's blanks, you can't put it to your head unless you're planning to kill yourself.
Yeah.
But
Brandon, that's what killed Brandon Lee.
Yeah. Well, in his case, there was actually a bullet in the chamber. So
yeah.
But blanks are dangerous things. You can't fool around with them. Just because they're blanks doesn't mean that they're harmless. And apparently, according to, I don't know if it was Reggie or somebody else that said this, they didn't realize that when they were doing the film. And I guess at one point they were firing a shotgun and somebody's, I guess it was the scene when they were firing the shotgun at the car that's following them.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe it was Coscarelli or somebody else was shooting that, and he had some sort of coat or something over him, so he wouldn't be seen, I guess, in reflections, and it caught on fire because of the flame from the gun, or something like that. Anyway, it was riskier than they realized, and I guess that's one of the disadvantages of being an inexperienced filmmaker. Although by the time he had done Phantasm, he actually had done 2 other feature films. He did James, the World's Greatest. Is that the name? Jim, the World's Greatest, and Kenny and Company. Kenny and Company, both of them apparently were released in '76. And Kenny and Company has 2 of the actors, Reggie and Mike, fellow that plays Mike, in a similar type of thing, so coming age story, kids, sort of dealing with the world. So he was a pretty experienced fellow. He's obviously a talented filmmaker, because even from his earliest film, from a technical standpoint, he's pretty proficient. He knows what he's doing, and he's getting good quality stuff. It doesn't look like junk. It looks like a movie with a little money behind it. And I think that's probably what helped Phantasm as well. It looks, particularly now when it's been restored, it looks like a pretty, well-made, well-crafted film.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't know. Like whenever I watch it, I keep forgetting that it was 76, 77. It has that early '80s look and feel to it for some reason.
Well, we were heading towards the '80s by that
Yeah.
point. So a lot of that, I guess the hairstyles are probably the strongest indication of the time period.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could see probably what happened was there were a lot of movies in the '80s that were influenced by Phantasm.
Probably, yeah.
So that's why you get that feeling.
I guess the weirdest outfit is the Reggie and his ice cream ice cream truck outfit is probably the weirdest.
Yes, he got the sideburns and a ponytail, I guess. And does he have a ponytail in the first film?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and he's got a bald head, and he's got black socks and sneakers on, and the ice cream costume. It's quite a getup. I always took him to be sort of like a past his prime hippie character.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what they were intending, but it feels to me like if you were casting that movie and you had more money, you might want to get somebody like George Carlin to play that part.
Yeah.
He feels like that sort of fellow. And you wonder if he's just selling ice cream out of his van.
Yeah. Well, I figured they're field musicians still hanging around town, probably playing at the cantina on the weekends.
Well, that scene of them sort of sitting on the porch, plucking away on their guitars, there's so many people online that say that that's a favorite scene of theirs from the film.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just something about those characters. It reflects something that people have experienced themselves. They know people like that, or they are people like that themselves. And so they have more affection for the movie as a result. And that's probably a lesson that we should learn about these films, that you can really get a lot of goodwill from the audience if you just show a world that they recognize on the screen, show people that they can sympathize with.
Yeah, I mean, I never wore all white like that, but I have sat around and played the guitar with other people. So,
well, yeah, it's you immediately, and the scene is really, when you stop and think about it, isn't an important scene in terms of the plot.
No.
But it is important in terms of winning the audience over to liking these characters and understanding them. Once you see that scene, you pretty much know who Reggie is, and you understand their friendship better.
Yeah.
Right? Although that one line where he says something about it's like hot like love. Is that the line? Get the line he actually uses. It's another one of those lines of dialogue that I thought when I heard it. Is that what they meant to say?
Maybe.
Was that what it was written in the script? I don't know. But it's a memorable line, I have to say. Where as hot as love is the actual line. I made a note of that. Not something that I've ever said to any of my musician friends, but there you go. He's a hippie. So these are the sort of things hippies say.
Yeah.
What else can we tackle about this one? Mike is eating a Tootsie Pop as he walks down the street. So there he's, Coscarelli, I assume, is trying to emphasize the fact that he's a boy.
Yeah.
He's still a kid. And that's important in establishing that. I mean, you have Angus Scrimm actually calling him a boy,
Boy, yeah.
but he really is a boy, and I think that's important to establish. And that's why as I mentioned, to me, that's why the first film works so much better than the sequel.
Yeah. In contrast, though, you have later when he runs. I guess something I can't remember what happened, but he runs home uh and his brother's there, and he sits down on his brother's lap and
Takes
takes
a
a swig
swig.
of beer. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
So now he's growing. He's growing as a
Yes,
character.
that's the thing. You're seeing him sort of slowly coming to terms with all these adult things. Like, for instance, he's uh, fixing the car, right? He's
Hmm.
driving his brother's car at one point. Uh, he's obviously expressing an interest in women, right? He reacts very favorably to the sight of the woman's breasts
Yeah.
when his brother is making out with her. Although I don't know how he could have seen a
I don't
breast
know how
from
you've seen it either. Yeah.
but still, it's a reaction shot that's worth having in the film. So I'm glad they did that. Or the firearms. I mean, there's some things that always struck me as kind of odd, like Jody gives him that speech about don't point a gun at somebody unless you plan to kill them,
Kill him. Yeah.
and shoot to kill. It seems like a weird thing to be telling a kid, especially since shortly afterwards he's firing wildly at a car that's approaching him,
Yeah.
and we're to believe that there wasn't anybody in the car. So why is he shooting at it?
Yeah. I know. Say they mentioned that twice. He says there's no one driving that car, and then when the car pulls up next to him, Mike says there's nobody driving that car.
right.
And I'm like,
Uh,
did they not mean for that to happen like twice? Or
well, yeah, that's the little peculiarities that result from shooting stuff over the course of a year, I guess.
yeah,
But the uh, the business about the guns, I guess that's another rite of passage thing. The kid is learning how to use guns and, accepting responsibility for the proper use of the guns. They make a big deal of having that scene of him when he runs home and he grabs, I guess, a shotgun and he falls asleep on the steps.
yeah,
And his brother comes down in the morning, and the first thing he does is take the cartridges out of the gun, right? So there's an emphasis on sort of adults learn responsibility, learn to be responsible with their use of firearms. All of that is sort of uh, rites of passage stuff, learning how to be an adult, and also being afraid, because I mean, kids have it good. I remember when I was that age, I didn't realize how good I had it. You didn't really have to worry about anything. You didn't have to worry about paying bills or paying the rent or getting sick or anything like
yeah,
that. Uh, so I guess maybe the reason why this movie is so effective for me is that you get an opportunity to go back and relish all the sort of stupid concerns that we have as kids at that age,
yeah,
as opposed to the far more troubling and just frustrating concerns that you have to face when you become an adult. So it's a combination of a small boy being sort of enticed by adulthood, looking forward to it, and saying, "Yes, I want some of that," but at the same time being scared by it, and being confused by it, finding it inexplicable. But that idea of a kid who's sort of sneaking around the edges of things and accidentally witnesses something that reveals some secret, that's something that we've seen in a lot of movies, and it's always an effective thing, right? Because we can always sympathize with somebody like that. He sees something he shouldn't have seen. But what a secret, right? To find
yeah.
out that your parents have been shrunk down into dwarfs.
Well,
Sent
another thing
into
too is
heaven.
like, who's gonna believe me if I tell them this, right?
Right,
I've seen
right,
something so fantastical that no one's gonna believe me, so I'll just keep it to myself.
right. Yes.
Everybody goes through that, I guess, in some weird ways.
Right. A kid is would be right to assume that no adult is going to believe a story like that. Right? When you get to a certain age, people might at least look into what you're telling them. But as a kid, you really are in a spot because it's very unlikely that anybody would buy that crazy story from a
Yeah,
kid. Although in the movie, his brother is fairly easily convinced, and so is Reggie. Though I can't blame them for being convinced. If
yeah.
I would be convinced too if I saw a moving finger in a
Finger,
box.
and then, of course, I guess
So,
Reggie didn't actually see the fly.
I guess
They
not.
they
Did
had
he?
already they'd already destroyed it before he got there.
Yeah. Well, he's knocked down in that scene, so
Yeah,
they're struggling with it in their coat.
yeah.
That's kind of an easy way to do a
Well,
special
actually, he
effect.
does. He does because they get it in there and it comes back out
Comes back out, right?
of
Yes.
the garbage disposal and lands on his head.
So he gets to see enough of it to
And
know that.
I think at that he actually says at that point, "Okay, I'm in.
Right.
I'm
It's
with you
almost
guys." Yeah,
immediately. Yes.
yeah.
Very easy to win over.
I don't know what I just saw, but let's go. I'm
Yes.
with you. Yeah,
And another thing that's interesting is the same sort of effect that I was talking about before. They say they're going to the sheriff. They never actually do. But because they say they're going to the sheriff, somehow, when I was thinking back about this film, I seem to remember
you've
that they
seen
did
them
go to the sheriff.
talking. Yeah,
Yeah. But they never do. They never, none of that is necessary. So,
never even see a sheriff in this movie.
right, no sheriff, right? The bartender, the caretaker at the mausoleum, the two girls that are in the antique shop, the fortune teller and her granddaughter, and the fellow that speaks to Jody about the funeral.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
that's
I
pretty
know
much it,
there
I
were
guess.
more people at the funeral, but I can't tell you how many. I can't tell you if it was one or if there was like 30 people in that room.
Well, they created the impression that it was quite a crowd,
Yeah, because they
but
have this slow camera moving towards the casket. So
right. But if you actually go back and look at the shots, you see that it's pretty sparsely populated. And
yeah,
even the scenes when they're putting the casket into the hearse, uh, there might be 6 or 7 people in the shot.
yeah,
And they used it's just 1 or 2 shots, and that's it. And all the other stuff, I think when Jody and Reggie are walking away, there's 2 other people in the distance walking away, but that's pretty much it.
yeah.
So, but I like that. I think that's important to sort of keep the whole thing pressurized.
Oh yeah,
One of the mistakes I think, right from the second film, is they're bringing in all these new characters, and if I have to reestablish who these people are, and all that, it just sort of takes the air out of the thing. You want it to be focusing just on those 2 or 3 people, right? Mike and Reggie and Jody. And you don't really want to go beyond that circle because it dissipates the suspense and the mystery of what's going on.
yeah.
So, that was
A
smart.
lot of good slow motion scenes too, like especially just people walking, especially with like the tall man walking down
Oh
the
yeah,
street when in slow motion and he stops when the. I'm assuming he doesn't like cold or he's attracted to cold. I can't remember what it was, but he's like
yeah,
smelling the the ice cream truck when the doors open. Just those are great scenes.
yeah. And actually, it doesn't pay off in the first film, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's nothing in the first film that would suggest what's going on there. We just have that scene. It's a very memorable scene.
Yeah.
I guess you're left to, in the sequels, they decide that cold is bad for him.
Yeah.
But in that scene, it almost looks like he's enjoying the
Yeah. But I
vapor.
could. Yeah. But I didn't know if it was that or if he was actually just looking at Mike across the street.
I think the way the
Really
scene
couldn't
plays
tell.
out,
Yeah.
at first, Mike thinks that he is looking at him and he
Right.
backs away. But then you realize that he's just sort of reacting to the vapor from the
Yeah.
dry ice.
Yeah.
So I think that my interpretation was that that whatever chemical is in dry ice, when it creates a vapor, that's something that he likes. That's something
Yeah.
that reminds him of home. But I can't really prove that because there's nothing else in the first movie about that. It's just a nice little weird touch. And they also were smart enough to shoot the tall man so that we don't see his platform shoes, which unfortunately in one of the latest sequels
They did. Yeah. Because I guess they were trying to recreate that exact same shot of him walking down the street, and it's full. Yeah.
You got to cut off the shoes though, because
Yeah.
you see him wearing conquistador boots.
Yeah.
That's not quite as convincing, but anyway, yeah, impressive. Also, I guess because Angus Scrimm was an extraordinary looking person.
Oh yeah.
He was a weird looking, scary looking guy.
One of the better villains as far as villains in horror movies.
Yeah, I'd say it's really unfortunate that we didn't take advantage of him while he was still alive. I know he did other movies, but
Yeah.
it seems to me when you give a performance like The Tall Man, you really should have been able to get a lot of other roles in horror films. You should have been like a Christopher Lee or a Boris Karloff or somebody
Yeah.
like that. And I don't think he ever quite achieved that. Maybe he didn't want to. I mean, it might be that he wrote the foreword for a book that I got on Kindle. Um, I'll just briefly give you the name of this in case anybody wants to get the complete inside story. It's called Phantasm Exhumed. Let me just bring it up here. It's written by a fellow by the name of Dustin McNeil. And the first book covers, I think, all the Phantasm movies, goes pretty in depth with the production story, the production side of it. And the introduction to the first book is written by Angus Scrimm. And from reading the introduction, he seems like a very intelligent guy.
Yeah.
Apparently, he was a writer, and his job was to write the liner notes for classical music albums. I don't know which company he worked for. I don't know who the big RCA, Victor, or whoever the big classical music publishers are, but that was his day job, right? Writing the liner notes for albums of classical music. But you can tell he's a smart guy, and maybe that's what his real interest. Maybe he did the acting as a sideline.
Well, I figure once you get so big, like, once 2 or 3 of the movies come out, and that's what he's known for. If anybody's going to put him in a movie, they're going to have him playing the same character.
Probably. Yeah.
And if you don't put him in makeup, you're just going to be watching and going, "Oh, it's a tall man." So it's probably hard to find other roles. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it would be a challenge, especially since they don't make movies like Phantasm that often.
Yeah.
So they probably find themselves in more pedestrian horror movies where it doesn't give them the same opportunity. He could bring a certain flair to this character because there was a certain theatricality to it that you probably wouldn't be able to get in another movie. Anyway, this fellow wrote 2 books, Phantasm Exhumed, and I think the other one is Phantasm Exhumed Again, or something along those lines. But I recommend them. I read them, even though I didn't much care for the sequels. It was still fascinating to read about how the movies were made and the difficulties that they went through. And I know Don Coscarelli also wrote a book, which I haven't acquired yet. I'm waiting for the prices to come down a little bit. But that should be an interesting story too, because not only did he do Phantasm and most of its sequels, but he also did the Beastmaster and Bubba Hotep or whatever.
Yeah.
And also John dies at the end, and he's a talented fellow. He's probably got a lot of stories to tell, and he's a smart guy. I've seen him interviewed, so I'm looking forward to reading that. But Phantasm. It's a fun movie. By the way, I should mention, Phantasm. Something struck me when we first started talking about doing a show about Phantasm. I think it was Aaron that first suggested it, and I mentioned at the time, because I was keen on doing something about Dark Shadows. Mentioned at the time there's a connection between Dark Shadows and Phantasm that I don't know if it was intentional, but the relationship between Barnabas Collins and David, the little boy in Dark Shadows series, is similar to the relationship that Mike has with the tall man. There's scenes in the old Dark Shadows TV show, not so much in the movie, but in the TV show, of Barnabas sort of towering over David and sort of intimidating him. And of course, the whole idea that David he figures out that Barnabas is a vampire, and he has that secret. He knows that secret, and nobody will believe him.
Yeah.
And Barnabas keeps showing up and sort of menacing him. That's sort of similar to what we see in Phantasm. I don't know if that was intentional. I mean, I'm going to guess that Don Coscarelli probably saw Dark Shadows when it was on. I don't know if he was a big horror fan, but it would have been easy to have seen that and sort of absorbed it and say, oh yeah, that's an interesting thing. A boy confronting this menacing adult.
Right.
It's kind of a dramatic thing. So that may be where the tall man comes from. I don't know. But it struck me that there was a similarity there. Coscarelli said that in his film Kenny and Company from 1976, there's a scene apparently where they're in an amusement park haunted house or something, and there's some jump scares. And the reaction that the audience had to those scenes was what convinced them to maybe try doing a horror movie. I guess he got a kick out of seeing how
Yeah.
easy it was to get a scare, get a rise out of the audience with a jump scare. So he, whether or not he had any interest in horror movies before that, I don't know, but that convinced him that maybe it would be, worthwhile doing a horror film. So that's where Phantasm came from.
Yeah, I was looking to see if Angus had played Frankenstein. Anything he did not. He did play Abraham Lincoln though, so that would have
Oh,
been
okay.
fitting.
Yes, I could see him as was it
Yeah.
a stage production
It just
or?
says it was a short, I guess like a short
Oh, sure.
film. It was from 1951. So yeah, I think he would have been a pretty good Frankenstein.
Yeah, I could see him. I mean, like Frankenstein's monster in the Boris Karloff movies, he has the platform shoes that he's
Yep.
putting on. And they also did the same trick with the jacket. They intentionally put him in a jacket that's a size too small, so he
Too
looks
small, yeah.
much bigger. That's something they did with Boris Karloff as well. So yeah, I could see him as I suppose, given the fact that he was able to handle dialogue, which a lot of times the heavies in horror movies are not really able to handle the dialogue.
Yeah.
That he was a literate, intelligent fellow and a good actor meant that he probably could have played a wide range of different roles, and not just have been limited to uh, saying "boy."
Yeah.
In the sequels, like I say, one of the advantages is that he gets a lot more dialogue. So and it's always a pleasure to see him on the screen. He knows how to deliver that melodramatic, villainous dialogue. It's a lost art, I think.
Oh yeah.
Aren't too many actors that could do that convincingly anymore.
Well, he done other stuff. He had a recurring role in Alias, the TV show.
Ah, well, there's the J.J. Abrams connection.
Yeah, so he played on there.
So
He had done a lot of TV, I guess, after these movies. Done some of the other. He was in like Wishmaster. Done the narrator for Wishmaster.
Oh.
Vampirella, which I think was a Roger Corman movie.
So, yeah, I think I've seen a Vampirella.
Yeah.
I don't remember it very well, but
yeah. But he also done a lot. He was in the John Dies at the End.
Okay.
Which was on the other, yeah. So I guess he started doing some of the badder, like with some of the worst, like B movies. Also, Dances with the Werewolves in 2017.
Well, to that extent, he's similar to Reggie, because apparently he went on and did a lot. Apparently, his wife is a special effects artist.
Mm-hmm.
So, and apparently in Phantasm, it was Coscarelli's mother that did some of the special effects, which is kind of interesting.
I believe so, yeah.
But Reggie, what's his name? Bannister? Is that
Bannister, yeah.
Yeah. His wife is a special effects artist, and apparently they present themselves as a kind of a team to indie horror
movies, yeah.
And I guess he's turned out quite a few of those.
Yeah, he was in. I've seen a couple of them he's in.
None
of them really stand out. No. One of them was called. I think we actually covered one of them when here. It was a Bloody Bible Camp. It was him and Ron Jeremy was in it. Yeah, it wasn't really good.
What a team, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, people have to make a living, and I guess trading on the success of Phantasm makes sense. And I guess it is a bargain for the filmmakers if you can hire a guy who has a reputation as a sort of a cult icon.
Yeah, and you can put his picture on the poster and give him top billing, and everybody's going to see it just for
that. In a way, I'm surprised we don't see him in more movies. I know he's probably in his 70s now. I think, right? So maybe he's slowing down a little bit. And I guess his main career is music. That's true of the fellow that played Jody as well, apparently. But yeah, it's surprising that he's not doing more stuff. You would think that would be quick money that he could pick up.
I figure he may be doing a lot of conventions also. Maybe doing the convention circuit.
Well, I hope he's taking advantage of that, because that's money. You don't want to leave any money on the table. You should go for broke with that, if that's the right expression to use.
Yeah.
The problem with the Phantasm franchise, as far as building a career on it, it is kind of like a niche audience for it.
Yeah.
I mean, it has a small but intensely loyal following. But it never really been like a mega blockbuster. I mean, the first film was not as big a hit as Halloween, obviously. And the sequels have all been fairly disappointing at the box office.
Right.
Universal apparently decided on the basis of the poor or disappointing returns on Phantasm 2 not to finance the third film. They distributed it apparently, but they didn't want to put any more money into it.
And they just they just didn't realize that it was their fault that the second one was so bad.
It probably was. They put all sorts of restrictions on it. Yeah.
Restrictions on it, and probably, had, I mean, obviously they were telling them who they could hire and who they couldn't hire, you know what I'm saying? So it's just like, and then it bombs and you're going to act like it was the movie's fault.
Right. Well, so Carey,
with it, we'll wipe our hands clean of this one,
Well, it's a curious thing because you would think they would say, and this sort of gives you an insight into how the industry works on the higher level.
Yeah.
You would think they would say, this guy made a really good and successful movie for $300,000. Why would you give him a couple of million to make a sequel? So why don't you say, okay, we'll give you a little more. We'll give you twice what you had for the first film.
Yeah.
And that way it's a smaller risk. It doesn't have to make as much in order for it to be a successful thing. But that's not the way they think in Hollywood. The studios, the way they think is, this is jobs and employment and money for everybody, right? They don't stop and think about whether or not the film is going to be profitable. That doesn't seem to be the main concern, because they know they'll be forgiven for making movies that aren't profitable. That happens all the time. And also with the ancillary markets, you can always manage to make money from, particularly movies that only cost a couple $1 million. They have the means to make back their money over time.
Yeah.
So the fact that it wasn't a blockbuster at the box office probably wasn't that crushing to them.
Yeah.
But it did mean when the time came to do a third film, they couldn't justify putting up any more money for it. It wasn't. There were other things that they could spend that money on that would be more likely to bring in a profit, like a sequel to Jaws.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'd say the budget of the first movie was probably Universal's regular advertising budget for any movie.
Probably so, yeah. The problem is that one of the reasons why low-budget movies like that are so memorable is because they have that low-budget feel. There's a quality that the films have as a result of being done cheaply.
Yeah.
We talked about this as far as like regional films like Blood Beat. The only thing that really makes that movie worth watching is the fact that it was done on a tiny budget by real people in real places, and the script would have been worthless if it had been done for like a couple of $1 million by name actors. It just wouldn't have had any effect at all. It's almost like going through a family album or watching home movies.
Yeah.
I know that doesn't sound appealing, but sometimes it can be appealing because we see ourselves in that, And if you're a person who has any aspirations of being a filmmaker yourself, it's always interesting to see what other people are able to do on a modest budget.
Yeah. See, when I watch it, even when I watch it today, I don't think of it as a low budget movie. I know they didn't have a big budget, but it's, I think it looks great. The acting's good. The special effects are, really good.
Yeah, $300,000.
Good script. So,
right. To us, $300,000 is a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
Halloween never seemed like a low budget movie either, but they were, and I guess it just goes to show really that if you're a talented director and you have a good DP, you can make 200,000, 300,000 look like a couple of million.
Yeah.
But it still has an air of the low budget film about it. And I think that's what makes it so charming. But there's probably a lot of people that look at a movie like this and say, "What the fuck are you talking about? Piece of junk," I think it was Vincent Canby who said when the film first came out that it was endearingly silly. And I guess that's a fair thing to say, right? It is kind of silly, but at the same time, it's charming and fun and endearing. You come away with a good feeling about the movie.
Yeah,
So that counts for a lot in my book.
that does. But
And
yeah,
certainly,
yeah, I recommend anybody. I mean, the first one, I guess watch the second one just because it continues the storyline, but with a different actor, it throws me off too much. I can't enjoy it. Part three, I really liked. Just the Reggie character was really good in it.
yeah,
The fact that it was, they were trying to do something, not different, but it's just that one character moving on and teaming up with other people that made it good. The rest of them, unless you're just interested in where they go with the story and you care about the tall man's backstory, if you're not, then don't even bother with the rest of them.
well, if nothing else, it might be fun to watch the rest of them just to see how long they can play out the
Yeah.
same ideas. So yeah, I mean, I felt an obligation to get through.
All of them. Yeah.
Once I got the three, I said, well, I got to go through and finish.
Yeah.
You know, and there were moments. There were some charming moments, memorable moments. I
Yeah.
think in each one of the films. I think with three, I really felt, oh, they've, the first part of the movie, I thought, oh, they really have found something here. This is going. I think it sort of petered out as it went along.
Yeah.
But for the first half of it, I thought it was quite solid. So yeah, certainly up to three, you should watch. You should take.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, if I was ever able to make a film as fun as the first film, I'd really be proud of myself.
Oh yeah.
I'd retire if I could do something as crowd pleasing and entertaining. I think it's an accomplishment. So, and it sort of makes you wonder, really. And this is I don't mean to disparage Don Coscarelli because, as I say, I think he's a very talented guy. It sort of makes you wonder why he wasn't able to do that again. I mean,
Yeah.
he did sequels to Phantasm. Why was he unable to come up with something new, something fresh that had the same impact? And I guess it just goes to show it ain't easy to do that.
Yeah. I guess the only other one that I could think of that had it a lot of popularity was the Bubba Hotep.
Yes, yeah.
And I think he's supposed to be making a sequel to that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, if I have to admit I haven't seen that or John Dies at the End yet, but I have them on my list. I've acquired files.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing them. But just from what I hear about the films, it doesn't seem like they had the same sort of fanatical, devoted following that
Right. Yeah.
Phantasm has. They're just people that found them entertaining and smart, and well done. But
of course, you got Bruce Campbell playing Elvis, so
right, well, that counts for a lot. But the first film has a following that is dedicated and enthusiastic about it beyond the actual merits of the film. That's a neat trick. If you can make something that hits people that way, that's the dream, I guess, of every filmmaker, is to find something that people will love no matter how flawed it is, that they'll be able to overlook the flaws because they love it so much.
Oh yeah.
So that's an accomplishment.
So let's talk about your accomplishments. Where can everybody find your movies at?
Well, Demon Resurrections on Tubi TV is doing pretty good there from what I see. It's also on Amazon Prime, pay-per-view. It's on Zumo TV, which is another free with ads platform. And I'm hoping that in the coming months that it might start popping up on some other platforms. My first film, I've just spent the past 3 years almost fiddling around with it, re-editing it, up-resing it, and just trying to make it into a better movie. And that work has essentially been finished. I just finished actually doing the score, which was a real trick for me because I am not a musician.
You're right.
So, there's nothing harder than doing something that you really can't do.
You can't do, yeah.
But that's all done for what it's worth. I made some strange noises on my computer and worked them in as a score. And that I'm hoping we'll be able to get that up on some of the streaming platforms maybe in the next 3 or 4 months.
All right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
And you'll be receiving a screener possibly in the next week or two.
So, okay, yeah. Definitely looking forward to that one.
Yeah. I hope I haven't oversold it. I mean, you've been waiting now for 2 years to see this.
I'm sure I'll enjoy it.
Well, I think it's I've had to watch it. It feels like I've watched it
Yeah.
100 times, and I think it's better. I think it's a fairly enjoyable movie. So I tried to do some of the things that we were talking about as far as trying to collapse things down, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's a very dialogue-heavy movie, so there's only so much I could take out of it.
Yeah. Well, maybe getting some fresh eyes on it will.
Yeah, hopefully people will be able to give me some insight into where I went wrong.
Yeah.
I'll know better next time. But at least, I hope it's an entertaining movie. At the very least, I know that it's not an embarrassing movie, which is,
Right. Yeah.
so that's what I was trying to do. I felt the original version of the film was kind of weak because we were rushed in the editing, and there were a lot of things about it that I wanted to fix. So I think I have been able to fix those things now. I think it moves a little more quickly, and it's a smarter film than it was. It's kind of clunky and melodramatic before. Now I think it's a little faster moving, a little sharper.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking forward to that one.
And people can learn about all this stuff on my Facebook page. I have a Facebook page under my name, and I have a Demon Resurrection Facebook page, and a Sleepless Nights Revamped. That's what we're calling it, Sleepless Nights Revamped. There's a Facebook page and a Twitter account for that and for Demon Resurrection. And I have a blog, and if you do Google search for me, you'll probably find me out there somewhere. But people should definitely check out Demon Resurrection on Tubi TV.
Oh yeah, I love it.
I know you're a big booster. You and Aaron have been very kind in your remarks, and I'm hoping that we can get more people to watch it so that I can retire.
There you go, and watch it on Tubi because that's where you get the biggest kickback.
That's right. That's right. Tubi is the place. What have you been up to? I know you have your many projects, your artwork, and
I have just doing my sketching that I do just in my free time, work, and trying to keep this thing afloat.
You have the audio version of a podcast from beneath on a bunch of different
all the major platforms. I don't even, there's some every day I'll find a new one that we're on that I didn't even know we were on. There's I was actually surprised to see that whenever I look at our what people are listening to us on, Winamp still shows up. I didn't think that was even around.
Which one?
Winamp. It's an old, it's an old early 2000s audio player.
Oh wow.
So,
yeah, I haven't even heard of that one.
Yeah, but
well, wherever they're listening, I guess that's good. So you're building a following, and you got merch that people can buy if they're.
Yeah, we got our TeePublic store with some shirts and coffee cups and notebooks and too much stuff to even mention on there. There's a lot of stuff on there. You just have to go in there and look at it.
Yeah.
The TeePublic is the site for that, and of course you can get the video versions on your YouTube channel.
Right, that's right. And we have quite a backlog of episodes
to be put up. Yes.
Right. I've been busy with Sleepless Nights, so I haven't had a chance to edit them and get them up. But now that I'm done with Sleepless Nights, I'm going to start posting those more regularly, so people will see more of us than they really want to see.
Yeah, they want to see. And of course, TikTok. You can get us on TikTok.
That's right. You got a TikTok.
Put up a new video. It actually, I think I'm finding out that the shorter videos do better than the longer videos. The problem with our show is it's hard to find a interesting 60-second clip because we kind of drone on about one subject too long.
Well, it's I guess when I'm involved, the shorter the better. It seems to be. The less people see me, the more they like me.
No, they're doing pretty good on there. The TikTok there.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. So the Carey Vickers universe is expanding.
Yes.
Well, thank you again for having me on these things. I guess it's been 2 years we've been doing these shows now. Right?
I think it's been 2 years since you've been on here. Yep.
So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to voice my screwy ideas.
No problem. I enjoy listening to them. Enjoy talking to you.
Great. Well, it's mutual.
Yep, and we'll definitely have to do this one again sometime next week.
Alrighty, great. I'll look forward to that.
Yep.